The last letter by Sebastian Reed. The winter of 1863 had been harsh in Tennessee, the cold gnawing at bones and spirits alike. Snow clung stubbornly to the ground, as if refusing to let go of the land just as fiercely as the men clinging to their causes. The Civil War raged on, but the hills and valleys had grown tired of blood. The silence between battles felt louder now, filled with the weight of all that had been lost. Captain Samuel Aldridge stood at the edge of the makeshift camp, gazing out over the frozen landscape. The wind bit at his face, but he hardly noticed anymore. His eyes, once sharp and full of purpose, now seemed distant, clouded with memories of what once was. His company, what was left of it, huddled by the dying fire, their faces pale and drawn, as though the very life had been drained from them. War had a way of doing that, of taking and taking until there was nothing left to give. In his hand, Samuel held a letter, crumpled and worn from days of being carried in his coat pocket. It had been written 2 weeks earlier, but he hadn't yet found the courage to read it. He knew who it was from: Clara, his wife back home in Mississippi. Her letters had once brought him comfort, a reminder of the life that waited for him beyond the battlefield. But now they were a painful reminder of the distance between them, of the man he used to be and the man he feared he had become. He unfolded the paper slowly, his fingers trembling, not from the cold but from something deeper, something that gnawed at his soul. My dearest Samuel, the days grow colder here, and the nights longer. The children ask about you often, and I find myself unsure of what to say. I tell them that you are brave, that you are fighting for something important, but in truth I no longer understand this war. I no longer understand what it is doing to us. The man I married, the man who held our children with such tenderness, seems so far away now. I fear that when you return, if you return, I may not recognize him. I pray for you every night, Samuel, not just for your safety but for your heart. I pray that the war does not take from you the kindness, the love, that I know still exists within you. I pray that you remember who you are, and why you fight. Not for glory, not for victory, but for the home you left behind, for the people who love you. Please come back to us, Samuel. Come back as the man I know you to be, not as the soldier this war wants to make of you. With all my love, Clara. Samuel stared at the words, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The letter was like a mirror, reflecting back at him the truth he had been avoiding for so long. He had changed. War had changed him. He had seen things no man should see, done things no man should do, and in the process he had forgotten what it meant to live, to feel, to be human. The sound of footsteps in the snow pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Sergeant Tom Brady approaching, his face grim. "Captain," Brady said, his voice low, "we've received word. Union forces are moving in from the north. General wants us ready by dawn." Samuel nodded, folding the letter and slipping it back into his coat. "How many men do we have left?" 20, maybe 25 fit for combat," Brady replied. "We've lost too many, sir. We can't keep this up." Samuel looked over at the men by the fire. They were gaunt, their eyes hollow, their bodies broken. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were survivors, clinging to the last remnants of their strength. And for what? Another battle? Another patch of frozen ground stained red with blood? "Tell the men to rest," Samuel said quietly. "We'll make our stand in the morning." Brady hesitated. "And after that, sir?" Samuel didn't answer. There was no after that. There was only the endless cycle of violence, a war that had long since lost its meaning. As Brady walked away, Samuel's mind drifted back to the day he left home. The sun had been shining, the air thick with the scent of magnolias. Clara had stood on the porch, their 2 children clinging to her skirt. Little Samuel Jr., barely 5 years old, had tried to look brave, but his quivering lip betrayed him. And Sarah, their 3-year-old daughter, had simply looked confused, not understanding why her father was leaving. Samuel had knelt down, gathering them both in his arms. "I'll be back before you know it," he had promised, his voice steady despite the ache in his heart. "You be good for your mama, you hear?" Clara had watched him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and fear. "You come back to us, Samuel," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You come back whole." Now, standing in the bitter cold of a Tennessee winter, those words echoed in Samuel's mind. Whole, he wasn't sure he even knew what that meant anymore. The night passed in uneasy silence. Samuel lay awake, staring up at the stars, his thoughts heavy with the weight of Clara's words. He had joined this war believing in a cause, states' rights, the preservation of a way of life. But now, all of that felt distant, like a faded memory. What was left was the cold, the hunger, the death. He had lost comrades, friends, brothers, and in the process he had lost himself. As dawn broke, the sound of marching feet echoed in the distance. The Union forces were close. Samuel rose, his body stiff with the cold, and gathered his men. They stood in a ragged line, their rifles ready, their faces set with grim determination. But Samuel could see the fear in their eyes, the doubt. They were tired of fighting. So was he. "Men," Samuel began, his voice carrying across the quiet morning air, "I know you're tired. I know you're scared. I am too." He paused, looking each of them in the eye. "But we have a duty. to our homes, to our families, to each other. We may not understand this war anymore, but we understand loyalty. We understand brotherhood. A murmur of agreement rippled through the ranks. Samuel continued, "Today, we fight not for some grand cause, not for glory or victory. We fight for the man next to us. We fight to see another sunrise, to have a chance to go home. Remember that when the battle starts. Remember who you are and why you're here." As the first shots rang out, Samuel took his place at the front, his rifle held steady. The Union soldiers emerged from the trees, their blue uniforms stark against the white snow. The battle began like so many others, violent, chaotic, senseless. Men fell, both blue and gray, their bodies crumpling into the snow like ragdolls. Samuel fired his rifle, reloaded, and fired again. The familiar rhythm of battle took over. But something inside him had shifted. The words of Clara's letter echoed in his mind, "Remember who you are, and why you fight." For the first time in months, Samuel truly saw the faces of the men he was fighting. They were young, like his son back home. They were scared, just like his men. They were human, just like him. And in that moment he realized that this war, this endless killing, would never truly end. There would always be another battle, another enemy, another reason to fight. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't lay down his arms and walk away. His men were counting on him. The faces of his family flashed before his eyes. Clara, Samuel Jr. and Sarah, he fought for them now, for the hope of returning home, of being the man they remembered. "Hold the line," Samuel shouted, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "Stand fast, men." Samuel moved among his men, encouraging, directing, fighting alongside them. He saw Brady fall, a bullet tearing through his shoulder. Without hesitation, Samuel dragged him to safety, tying off the wound with a strip torn from his own shirt. "You're going to be all right, Tom," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "You're going home, you hear me." Brady nodded weakly, his face pale from blood loss. "Thank you, Captain," he managed to say before losing consciousness. As Samuel turned back to the battle, he saw a young Union soldier, barely more than a boy, aiming his rifle directly at him. Time seemed to slow. Samuel raised his own weapon, knowing he should fire, knowing his life depended on it. But in that moment, all he could see was his own son's face superimposed over the young soldier's. The crack of a rifle split the air, and Samuel felt a searing pain in his chest. He stumbled backward, his rifle slipping from his grasp. As he fell, he saw the young Union soldier lower his weapon, a look of shock and regret on his face. Samuel hit the ground hard, the cold snow seeping into his uniform. The sounds of battle seemed to fade away, replaced by a strange, peaceful silence. He stared up at the sky, watching as snowflakes drifted down, melting as they touched his face. In that moment, as his life ebbed away, Samuel's thoughts turned to Clara and the children. He saw them as clearly as if they were standing before him. Clara's gentle smile, Samuel Jr.'s mischievous grin, Sarah's bright, curious eyes. He saw the home he had left behind, the life he had hoped to return to.